I learned the danger of silence the day my son-in-law smiled at me like I was already defeated. He stood in my kitchen, leaning against the counter where I had kneaded dough for over 30 years, and he spoke to me slowly. Not kindly, slowly, like I was hard of hearing, like I was something old that had already lost its sharp edges. "You don't have to worry about those papers anymore," he said. "I've taken care of it." I remember the smell of onions frying on the stove. I remember the clock ticking too loud for a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I remember the way my hands stayed still at my sides, even though every part of me wanted to ask what papers he meant. That was the moment he decided I was powerless. And that was my mistake too, because I said nothing. I have always been a quiet woman, not weak, just quiet, the kind who listens longer than she speaks, the kind who believes time reveals more than arguments ever could. I raised my children that way. I worked my whole life that way. I survived loss that way. But silence, I learned too late, is a blade, and if you hold it long enough, someone will cut themselves on it. My name is Margaret ***. I am 62 years old. I am a mother of 2, a widow of 11 years, and until recently I was invisible inside my own family. I used to think that was fine. Before everything changed, my life was simple in the best way. I lived in the same house my husband and I bought when our first child was born. The paint had faded, the garden fence leaned slightly to the left, and the front door stuck when it rained. But it was mine. Every crack in the wall carried a memory. Every chair knew the weight of my tired body at the end of the day. I woke up early before the sun because my body never forgot responsibility. I made my tea strong. I swept the front step even when it was already clean. Old habits outlive grief. My daughter Emily visited most afternoons. She lived 15 minutes away with her husband, Daniel ***. They had been married for 6 years. No children yet. That was a wound we never touched directly, only circled around with polite concern and quiet hope. Emily was my soft place. She had my eyes and my patience. When she laughed, it came out in small bursts like she didn't want to take up too much room. She was thoughtful, gentle, too gentle if I'm honest. The world takes advantage of hearts like hers. Daniel was different. He was polished where Emily was plain. He wore expensive watches that caught the light. He spoke with certainty, with confidence, with the kind of charm that made strangers trust him fast. He worked in property management, always on calls, always negotiating, always talking about investments and opportunities. In the beginning, I admired his ambition. I thought it meant my daughter would be protected. When Daniel married Emily, he shook my hand firmly and called me Mom with warmth in his voice. He brought wine when he visited. He fixed things around the house without being asked. Everyone said I was lucky. I believed them. After my husband passed, Daniel stepped into spaces I hadn't invited him into. He offered to help organize my finances. He said paperwork was stressful for someone my age. He said he could handle things more efficiently. "You shouldn't worry about all this," he told me once, gently sliding a pen across the table. "You've already carried enough in life." There was kindness in his voice, but there was something else too, something sharp beneath the surface. I felt it faintly, like a cold draft under a closed door. I ignored it. I signed what he placed in front of me. I trusted where I should have read. I believed family meant safety. Life went on quietly. I cooked for one, I tended my plants, I watched the neighborhood change slowly. Children grew taller, old neighbors moved away, new ones arrived with louder cars and louder voices. And gradually, almost politely, Daniel began to change. It wasn't dramatic, that's how these things slip past you. He stopped asking for my opinion, then he stopped explaining. Conversations became announcements, decisions turned into statements. "I spoke to the bank," he'd say. "I arranged an evaluation. This is the smarter option." Always that phrase, the smarter option, for who I wondered but never asked. The first time he talked over me, I laughed it off. The second time I swallowed my words. By the third time I noticed Emily watching me quietly, her lips pressed together like she wanted to speak but didn't know how. I didn't want to put her in the middle. That's what mothers tell themselves when they choose peace over truth. One afternoon, Daniel showed up unannounced with a folder under his arm. He spread papers across my dining table, pushing aside the runner my sister-in-law had stitched decades ago. "These are just updates," he said, Formalities. The papers smelled like ink and authority. My name was printed neatly at the top, but the words below it felt foreign. Transfer, authorization, management rights. "What is this?" I asked quietly. Daniel smiled, not his friendly smile, his patient one, the one adults use with children. "It's complicated," he said. "You don't need to worry about the details." Emily stood near the doorway, silent, too silent. That night I lay awake listening to the ceiling fan tick unevenly. My husband used to fix that. The sound felt louder than it should have. My thoughts circled without landing. Something was shifting. I could feel it deep in my chest. But I did nothing. Weeks passed, then months. Daniel visited less, but when he did, his tone had changed. He no longer tried to impress me. He no longer explained himself. One day he referred to my house as the property. Not my home. The property. That word settled heavy in my stomach. I began noticing small things. Letters addressed to him arriving at my address. Bank envelopes with logos I didn't recognize. A real estate agent's business card tucked inside a magazine on my coffee table. When I asked Daniel about it, he didn't look surprised. He looked irritated. "You worry too much," he said. "Trust me." Trust, a word that once felt safe. The moment I understood how little power he believed I had came quietly. No shouting, no scene. Just that smile in my kitchen, that slow voice, that sentence. "I've taken care of it." I nodded, I poured his coffee, I thanked him. Inside, something hardened. That night I pulled a box from the back of my closet. Inside were papers I hadn't touched in years, old deeds, receipts, letters written in my husband's careful handwriting. I read until my eyes burned. I didn't yet know the full truth. But I knew this much. Silence had invited a storm into my home. And storms don't ask permission before they destroy. The box stayed open on my bed for 3 days. I didn't rush through the papers, I moved slowly. The way you do when you are afraid that moving too fast might make something real before you are ready to face it. Each evening after dinner, I sat on the edge of the mattress and unfolded one document at a time. Deeds, old bank statements, letters from the city office stamped and yellowed with age. Everything was in my name. Not Daniel's, not Emily's, mine. The house, the land, even the small plot behind the fence that my husband had bought quietly, thinking one day we might grow old tomatoes there together. I remembered him standing in that spot, hands on his hips, planning a future he never lived to see. I slept poorly those nights, not because I didn't understand what I was reading, but because I understood it too well. If everything was still in my name, why was Daniel speaking as if decisions had already been made? Why were banks sending letters addressed to him? Why did the word transfer keep appearing in paperwork I had never signed knowingly? During the day I carried on as usual. I watered the plants. I answered Emily's calls with the same steady voice. I smiled when neighbors waved. On the outside, nothing had changed. Inside, a quiet watchfulness had begun. Emily came over one afternoon with soup she'd made herself. She placed it carefully on the stove, wiping a drop that had spilled, the way she always did when she was nervous. "You look tired, Mom," she said. "I didn't sleep much," I answered. She hesitated, then sat across from me at the table. Her fingers traced the rim of her mug. She opened her mouth, closed it, then tried again. "Daniel been under a lot of pressure at work," she said. "He's just trying to help, you know that, right?" There it was, not a question, a request. I watched her face closely. There were faint shadows under her eyes. She looked thinner than usual. "What kind of help?" I asked. She shrugged too quickly. "Just organizing things, planning ahead." Planning ahead, another phrase that floated without an anchor. "I didn't ask him to plan," I said gently. Emily flinched just slightly. "He worries about you," she said. "He thinks it's safer if things are streamlined." Safer for who, I wondered again, but this time I didn't say it out loud. "I've managed my life for 62 years, I said. "I don't feel unsafe." Emily smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course I know that." She stayed only 20 minutes that day. When she left, I noticed she forgot her scarf. I held it in my hands after the door closed. It still smelled faintly of her shampoo. Something was wrong, not just with Daniel, with Emily too. The next letter arrived on a Thursday morning. Thick envelope, official logo. I opened it standing by the counter, my tea growing cold beside me. It was a notice of intent. Not a final decision, not yet. But it spoke of refinancing options, of leveraging assets, of consent already in progress. Consent. That word sat heavy in my chest. I called the number listed at the bottom. A woman answered, brisk but polite. She confirmed my name, my address. Then she paused. "Oh," she said, "we have your son-in-law listed as the primary contact." "I didn't authorize that," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "According to our records, authorization documents were submitted 2 months ago." My fingers tightened around the phone. "I would like copies of everything you have," I said, "sent directly to me." She hesitated. "I'll need to check with me," I said calmly. "I am the owner." Silence on the line. "Yes," she said finally, "of course." When I hung up, my hands were shaking, not with fear, with clarity. Daniel had not asked for my permission. He had assumed it. That evening, Daniel came over unexpectedly. Emily stayed in the car, engine running. "I won't stay long," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "Just wanted to update you." Update, that word again. He walked through my living room like he owned it, glancing at walls, windows, the ceiling. "We might have a buyer interested," he said casually. "Nothing final yet." My heart thudded once hard. "A buyer for what?" I asked. He looked at me surprised, truly surprised, as if he couldn't understand why I didn't already know. "The house," he said. I set down the dish towel I was holding. I folded it carefully once, then again, placing it on the counter. "I'm not selling my house," I said. Daniel laughed, not unkindly, not loudly, just enough to dismiss me. "Mom," he said, "this isn't emotional, it's practical." "I didn't agree to this," I said. He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You signed documents months ago." "I signed what you told me were updates." "That's how these things work," he replied. "You can't expect to understand all the details." The air between us felt thick. "I want copies of everything," I said, "and I want you to stop making decisions for me." For the first time, his smile faded. "You're overreacting," he said. "Emily and I are just trying to secure everyone's future." "By selling my home?" I asked. "It's an asset," he said. "You don't need all this space." I looked around the room, the couch where my husband used to nap, the corner where my son took his first steps, the wall where pencil marks still tracked my children's height over the years. "I need my dignity," I said quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened. "This isn't up for debate," he said. "The process has already started." There it was, the truth slipping out without polish. "I suggest you trust me," he added. "Fighting this will only make things harder." I felt something settle inside me then, not anger, resolve. "You should leave," I said. He stared at me, disbelief flickering across his face. "I'll talk to Emily," he said coldly. "She'll calm you down." When he left, the house felt too quiet. I sat down slowly, my knees weak. That night, I didn't open the box of papers. I opened my notebook. I wrote dates, names, phone numbers. I wrote down every conversation I could remember, every document I had signed, every moment that had felt wrong. Silence had been my habit. Documentation would be my answer. Over the next 2 weeks, I learned things Daniel had hoped I wouldn't. The authorization he submitted gave him management power, not ownership. Temporary, conditional, easily challenged. The buyer he mentioned wasn't a stranger. It was a company connected to someone he worked with. The updates I signed were incomplete without my informed consent. And Emily knew more than she had told me, not everything, but enough. When I confronted her gently, tears filled her eyes. "He said you were tired," she whispered. "He said it was temporary." "Temporary has ruined more lives than cruelty ever could." "I trusted him," she said, voice breaking. "I thought he knew better." I reached for her hand. "So did I said. That was the moment I stopped protecting everyone else's feelings and started protecting myself. The truth was forming now, slowly, clearly. And Daniel still thought I was quiet because I was weak. He had no idea silence had been my preparation. The documents arrived in a thick envelope 3 days later. I didn't open them right away. I set them on the dining table and walked away like they might explode if I touched them too fast. I washed my cup. I wiped the counter. I stood by the window and watched a cat cross the street, unbothered by anything at all. Then I sat down and opened the envelope. There it was, every page Daniel hoped I would never see clearly. Forms submitted with confidence, boxes checked without explanation, language designed to confuse, to rush, to quietly corner someone who trusted too easily. My signature was there, but so were gaps, missing disclosures, sections left conveniently vague, and in the margins notes written in someone else's hand. Daniel's handwriting was sharp, confident, impatient. I felt something break open in my chest, not a sudden crack, a slow, painful splitting like wood pulled apart grain by grain. This wasn't help. This was strategy. I spent the next 2 days reading, calling, asking questions. I wrote everything down. I asked the same question 3 different ways to 3 different people. When answers didn't match, I circled them in red. By Friday afternoon, I knew enough to stop pretending. Daniel had positioned himself as my representative without my informed consent. He had approached lenders, real estate contacts, even a legal office, all under the assumption that I would never challenge him, that I wouldn't understand, that I wouldn't dare. He had been careful, though, just careful enough to believe he could talk his way out if needed. That care told me something important. He knew what he was doing was wrong. I asked Emily to come over that evening, just her, no Daniel. She arrived with nervous energy clinging to her like static. She kept adjusting her bag strap, smoothing her sweater, touching her hair. "You sounded serious," she said. "I am," I replied. We sat at the dining table. I placed the documents between us. I didn't push them toward her. I didn't point. I simply let them exist. "I need you to tell me the truth," I said. "Not the version Daniel gave you, yours." She stared at the papers, her eyes filled before she spoke. "He said it was temporary," she whispered again. "He said it would help with our finances, that it was safer if things were under one umbrella." "One umbrella," I repeated. "Whose hands were holding it?" She swallowed. "He said you wouldn't mind," she said, "that you trusted him." "I trusted him to respect me," I said. "There's a difference." She looked up then, really looked at me, not as her mother, as a person. "He told me not to tell you everything," she admitted. "He said it would confuse you." That sentence landed heavier than anything else. "Not because of Daniel. Because of Emily." "Did you believe that?" I asked quietly. She nodded, tears spilling now. "I didn't want to fight him. He gets cold when he feels challenged." I leaned back in my chair. The room felt smaller. "Has he always been cold with you?" I asked. She hesitated too long. That hesitation answered more than her words ever could. I reached across the table and took her hands. They were trembling. "You don't have to protect me," I said, "and you don't have to protect him either." Her shoulders shook as she cried. "I didn't think he would go this far." Neither did I, but here we were. That night I called Daniel. I didn't accuse, I didn't raise my voice. I asked him to come over the next day to talk. He arrived confident, like a man who believes the ground beneath him is solid. Emily wasn't home, I made sure of that. "I've reviewed the documents," I said once we were seated. He smiled thinly. And you exceeded your authority," I replied. His smile tightened. "I acted in your best interest." "You acted in your own," I said. His eyes hardened. "You're misunderstanding the situation." "No," I said, "I'm seeing it clearly for the first time." I slid copies of the papers across the table, highlighted, annotated, organized. He glanced at them, then back at me. Something flickered in his expression, not fear, calculation. "These are standard procedures," he said. "You're overcomplicating it." "You listed yourself as primary contact without consent," I said. You initiated negotiations without disclosure. You discussed sale options without my agreement. He leaned back, crossing his arms. You signed. I signed incomplete information, I said. That matters. His voice sharpened. You're being emotional. I waited a beat. No, I said, I'm being precise. That threw him. You're risking family harmony over paperwork, he said. I'm protecting my autonomy, I replied. Silence stretched between us. Then he said the thing he probably thought would end it. You don't have the energy to fight this. I smiled then, not because it was funny, because it was revealing. You mistake my quiet for exhaustion, I said. They are not the same. He stood up abruptly. If you push this, he said, it will get ugly. Then it will be honest, I replied. He left without another word. That night Emily called me crying. Daniel had told her I was being difficult, that I was confused, that I was sabotaging their future. I don't know who to believe, she said. I closed my eyes. Believe the documents, I said. Believe what is written when emotions are stripped away. The next week unfolded slowly, painfully. Daniel stopped visiting. Emily came alone, quieter each time. Friends started asking strange questions. A neighbor mentioned seeing a real estate agent outside my house. The private had begun to leak into the public. Then came the final confirmation. A letter from a legal office, addressed to Daniel, but mistakenly delivered to me. Inside was a draft agreement, not final, but detailed, too detailed. It included projected profits. Daniel's name was listed as beneficiary. Not Emily's. Not mine. His. I sat at the table holding that letter until my hands went numb. This wasn't about helping. This was about control. And gain. I called the legal office the next morning. I believe there's been a misunderstanding, I said calmly. I'd like to clarify ownership and consent. The lawyer sounded polite, then cautious, then uncomfortable. By the end of the call, he promised a full review. That afternoon, Daniel showed up unannounced. His voice was tight. You went behind my back. No, I said. I stepped out from under your shadow. He leaned close, lowering his voice. You're embarrassing me. I met his gaze. You embarrassed yourself. For the first time, he looked uncertain. This doesn't have to escalate, he said. We can still manage this quietly. Quietly, that word again. No, I said, quiet is what allowed this. He stared at me, jaw clenched, realizing too late that the version of me he relied on no longer existed. I'm revoking your authority, I said, effective immediately. You can't. I can, I said, and I have. I handed him a copy of the revocation notice. He left without another word. That evening, Emily came over and sat on the floor like she used to when she was a teenager. She leaned against my knees. I'm scared, she said. I know, I replied, resting my hand on her head. He's angry, she whispered. So was your father, I said softly, when he realized he couldn't control something. She looked up at me. What are you going to do now? I took a slow breath. I'm going to finish what silence started, I said, and end it properly. The truth was no longer private. And Daniel was about to learn that quiet women don't lack power. They choose when to use it. Once silence is broken, it doesn't shatter all at once. It cracks slowly in careful lines, like ice giving way under steady pressure. The morning after I revoked Daniel's authority, I woke earlier than usual, not from anxiety but from clarity. My body moved with purpose. I dressed neatly, made my bed, watered the plants. These small rituals mattered. They reminded me who I was before anyone tried to take that from me. At 9 o'clock sharp, I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook, documents arranged in tidy stacks. The house felt different now, lighter, like it was waiting with me. I started with the bank. I asked for a full account freeze on any transactions initiated without my direct approval. I spoke calmly, using names, dates, reference numbers. The man on the phone shifted from polite to attentive once he realized I wasn't confused or emotional. Next, the legal office. I requested written confirmation that all negotiations were halted pending verification of ownership and consent. I didn't threaten, I didn't accuse, I asked questions that demanded answers. Then I called the real estate agency, whose card I had found weeks ago. Yes, I said evenly, that property is not for sale. Any representation otherwise is unauthorized. There was a pause, then an apology, then assurance. By noon, the machinery Daniel had set in motion was grinding to a halt. And he knew it. My phone rang 3 times that afternoon. I didn't answer. The 4th time I did. "This is unnecessary," Daniel said. He skipped greetings now. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." "I'm making it accurate," I replied. "You're putting Emily in an impossible position." "I'm putting her in the truth." "You're risking everything," he snapped. I thought of the house, the memories, the dignity he thought expendable. "I'm risking nothing that was ever mine to lose," I said. He hung up. That evening, Emily came over with red eyes and tense shoulders. She didn't sit right away. She stood in the doorway like she wasn't sure where she belonged. "He says you're trying to humiliate him," she said. "I'm correcting him," I replied. She paced the room. "He keeps saying this will affect his reputation, his work." "Then he should have acted with integrity," I said. She stopped packing and looked at me, really looked. "You're not backing down," she said. "No," I said, "I'm standing still." That seemed to land differently. Daniel's reaction when it came was not explosive, it was calculated. Within days, whispers started circulating. Friends asked questions that carried assumptions. Someone mentioned I was difficult. Another said I was emotional since the loss. The story Daniel told was subtle. He didn't call me cruel, he painted me as fragile. That hurt more than open hostility. But truth has weight, and lies require constant upkeep. I responded not with counter-stories, but with consistency. When a mutual friend asked if I was selling my house, I said calmly, "No, that information was shared without my consent." When someone hinted I was causing strain in Emily's marriage, I replied, "Strain comes from dishonesty, not boundaries." Slowly, the questions stopped turning toward me and started turning toward him. The real shift came when the legal office requested a joint meeting. Daniel insisted on attending alone. They refused. Emily came with him. I arrived separately. The room was small, neutral, a table, 4 chairs, a clock ticking too loud. The lawyer spoke first. "After reviewing the documentation," he said, "we have concerns regarding representation and disclosure." Daniel stiffened. "There was no malicious intent," he said quickly. "This was a family matter." "Family matters still require consent," the lawyer replied. I said nothing, I let the papers speak. Emily sat quietly, hands folded, eyes fixed on the table. The lawyer continued, "Any further action would expose all parties to liability." Daniel's face flushed. "So what?" he said sharply. "Everything just stops." "Yes," the lawyer said, "effective immediately." Silence. Then Daniel turned to me. "This could have been handled privately," he said. I met his gaze. "Privacy protected you," I said. "Transparency protects me." The meeting ended without drama. No raised voices, no accusations. But something fundamental had shifted. Daniel no longer controlled the narrative. That evening, Emily stayed with me longer than usual. She helped me wash dishes, her movements slow and thoughtful. "He never told me about the profit," she said quietly, "the part where his name was listed." I didn't respond right away. "He said it was just paperwork," she continued, "but he never mentioned that." I turned off the tap and faced her. "What does that tell you?" I asked. She swallowed. "That he planned this." And I asked gently. "And that he didn't think I needed to know." That realization hurt her more than anything I could have said. Over the next week, consequences began arriving without my involvement. The company Daniel worked with withdrew the offer quietly. The legal office distanced itself. A colleague asked him uncomfortable questions. Nothing dramatic, nothing cruel. Just doors closing. Emily stopped defending him. One night she stayed over. We sat on the couch watching nothing in particular. I don't recognize him anymore, she said. I reached for her hand. Sometimes people reveal themselves slowly, so we have time to leave. She nodded. Daniel tried once more. He showed up at my door unannounced, eyes tired, voice softer. You've made your point, he said. We can move forward now. Forward how? I asked. Without lawyers, without outside involvement. I shook my head. You don't get to choose the terms anymore, I said. You forfeited that when you decided for me. His jaw tightened. Emily won't forgive you for this. I looked past him at the street, the sky turning gold with evening. She'll forgive the truth, I said, even if it takes time. He stood there a moment longer, then turned and left. That night I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. Action hadn't brought peace. Integrity had. And the world was beginning to see Daniel not as he presented himself, but as he had behaved. Truth doesn't announce itself loudly. It moves like a current under still water, and once people feel it shift, they start paying attention. The first real crack in Daniel's public image didn't come from me or from Emily. It came from his own mouth. He had built his reputation carefully over the years. Reliable, smart, trustworthy. The man who handled things. The man people leaned on. When someone like that stumbles, even slightly, people notice because they're not used to watching him lose his footing. A week after the legal meeting, a neighbor stopped me while I was trimming the hedge. I heard there was some confusion about your house, she said lightly, like she was asking about the weather. I wiped my hands on my apron. There was misinformation shared, I said. It's been corrected. She nodded slowly. That's good, I thought it sounded odd. Odd, that was the word that followed Daniel now. Not criminal, not cruel, just odd, and odd makes people curious. At the grocery store, a woman Daniel worked with approached me near the produce aisle. She smiled politely, but her eyes were searching. Margaret Wright, she asked. I'm Claire, I work with Daniel. Yes, I said. She hesitated. He mentioned you weren't well for a while. I met her gaze. I'm quite well. Her smile faltered just enough. Oh, she said, that's good to hear. She walked away, glancing back once. I didn't chase her, I didn't correct her, I didn't need to. When stories don't line up, people start asking their own questions. Emily felt it too, the shift. Friends stopped calling Daniel for advice, invitations slowed, conversations grew careful. One evening, she came over carrying a folded letter. He got this today, she said, placing it on the table. I didn't open it, I didn't need to. They're reviewing his role in a recent transaction, she continued. Nothing official yet, but they've asked for explanations. I nodded. That's how accountability begins. She exhaled slowly, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. He keeps saying this is your fault, she said, that if you'd stayed quiet none of this would have happened. I looked at her, really looked at her. And what do you think? I asked. She sat down heavily. I think silence was protecting him, not us. That sentence told me everything I needed to know. Daniel tried to regain control by reframing the story. He told people I misunderstood, that grief had clouded my judgment, that family disagreements had escalated unnecessarily. But he underestimated one thing. I never contradicted him publicly. When people asked, I answered plainly, no emotion, no drama. Yes, there were documents submitted without my consent. No, I never agreed to sell. Yes, everything is now resolved legally. That was it. I didn't name him. I didn't explain his motives. I didn't share the profit projections or the beneficiary details. I didn't need to. Because when a man tells 10 versions of the same story, and a woman tells one steady truth, people know where to stand. The real consequence arrived on a rainy Thursday. Daniel's supervisor requested a meeting. Emily wasn't told the details at first, only that it was procedural. He came home that evening pale, movements sharp and restless. They're suspending me pending review, he said. Emily stared at him. For what? For conflict of interest, he snapped. For overstepping. She waited. They said my judgment might be compromised, he added, because of personal involvement. She folded her arms. Was it? He didn't answer. That silence was louder than any argument. By the weekend, extended family had heard enough to start drawing lines. Daniel's brother stopped returning his calls. An aunt asked Emily gently if she was okay. Someone mentioned they admired how I'd handled things with dignity. Dignity, that word felt like a quiet gift. Daniel, however, saw it as betrayal. He confronted Emily one night, voice raised, frustration spilling over. You took her side, he said, after everything I've done for you. Emily stood her ground, trembling but firm. I didn't take sides, she said. I chose honesty. He scoffed. She turned everyone against me. No, Emily replied, your actions did. That was the moment their marriage shifted irreversibly. Not with shouting, with clarity. Daniel moved out 2 weeks later. Just for space, he said. He packed lightly like he expected to come back. Emily didn't stop him. The community adjusted the way it always does. Slowly, carefully, conversations changed tone. Invitations were extended without his name attached. I wasn't celebrated, I wasn't pitied. I was respected. One afternoon, I hosted a small gathering. Nothing formal, tea, biscuits, familiar faces. Laughter returned to my living room, tentative at first, then fuller. Someone asked how I found the strength to stand up. I smiled. I didn't find it, I said. I stopped giving it away. Daniel heard about that gathering from someone else. He called me that night. You're enjoying this, he said bitterly. No, I replied, I'm living. There was a pause. You could have ruined me, he said. I could have, I agreed, but I chose not to. He laughed humorlessly. You always liked being the bigger person. No, I said, I like being the honest one. He hung up. By then his reputation wasn't destroyed. It was something worse. It was questioned. And for a man who built his life on control and perception, that was devastating. Emily stayed with me more often. She began speaking more freely, laughing more easily. One evening she said, I don't know what will happen to my marriage. I squeezed her hand. You don't have to decide today. She nodded, but I know one thing. What's that? I asked. I won't be quiet again. That was the real consequence. Not Daniel's suspension, not the whispers, not the doors closing. But the silence breaking in the people who had learned to live under it. And once that happens, nothing ever goes back the way it was. The house felt different once the noise faded. Not emptier, calmer. The kind of calm that comes after something heavy has been moved out of the way. The air seemed to settle into itself. Even the light coming through the windows looked softer, like it was no longer being asked to witness anything tense. Emily moved into the spare room for a while. We didn't call it a separation. We didn't give it a name at all. It was simply space. Space to breathe. Space to hear our own thoughts again. In the mornings we drank coffee together at the kitchen table. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't sharp. It wasn't hiding anything. It was restful. One morning, Emily looked up from her mug and said, I keep thinking about all the moments I felt small and told myself it was love. I nodded. That's how control survives. It borrows the language of care. She let that sit between us. Daniel called less often. When he did, his voice sounded unfamiliar to me now, less certain, less polished. He asked about logistics, about timelines, about what Emily planned to do. He didn't ask how she felt. That told her more than any argument could. The legal matters resolved quietly. Official letters arrived confirming what I already knew. Full ownership remained with me. All unauthorized actions were void. Nothing further required. I placed those letters in the same box where my husband's papers rested. They belonged together. Proof of a life built carefully and defended when necessary. Daniel's suspension turned into a formal warning. He wasn't fired. He wasn't ruined. But he was limited. And limitation is a hard lesson for someone used to control. Emily eventually told him she needed more time. He pushed. She held her ground. He accused. She stayed calm. One evening, she came home after seeing him and sat beside me on the couch. He said, "I've changed," she said. I smiled faintly. "You have." He said, "You turned me against him." I shook my head. "You turned toward yourself." She leaned her head on my shoulder. For the first time in a long while, her body felt relaxed. Healing didn't arrive like a sunrise, it came like dusk, gradual, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. I started sleeping through the night. I returned to my morning walks. Neighbors waved. Conversations felt normal again. I planted new flowers in the garden. Ones my husband had always said were too delicate for our soil. They grew just fine. Emily began seeing a counselor. She spoke about patterns, about boundaries, about learning to trust her instincts again. "I ignored so many signs," she said once. "You listened to them eventually," I replied. "That matters." She stayed with me for 3 months. When she moved back to her own place, she did it on her terms, slowly, thoughtfully. Her marriage remained uncertain, but her sense of self no longer was. As for Daniel, I thought of him less and less, not because I forgave him completely, but because he no longer occupied my inner world. Power fades when attention leaves. One afternoon, Emily asked me something that surprised her as much as it surprised me. "Were you ever scared," she asked, "when you decided to speak up?" I considered the question. "Yes," I said, "but not of him." "Of what then?" "Of teaching you that silence was survival," I said. "I didn't want that lesson to pass to you." She reached for my hand. "You didn't." The house filled again with ordinary sounds, laughter, music from Emily's room, the kettle boiling. Nothing dramatic. Everything meaningful. I kept my routines, I kept my home, I kept my voice. And that was enough. There's a kind of silence people don't talk about. Not the peaceful kind, not the quiet of early mornings or empty rooms. I mean the silence we learn to wear so others stay comfortable. The silence that keeps the table calm while something inside us slowly disappears. I wore that silence for a long time. I told myself it was love. I told myself it was patience. I told myself it was maturity. But what it really was permission. Permission for someone else to decide my limits. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't destroy anyone, I didn't seek revenge, I simply stopped agreeing to be erased, and somehow that was enough to change everything. What I learned is this: power doesn't always announce itself, sometimes it waits, sometimes it watches, and sometimes it grows quietly until the moment comes when silence is no longer protection but danger. If you're listening to this and you feel small in a room you helped build, I want you to hear me clearly. Your calm is not weakness. Your patience is not consent. And your silence should always be a choice, never an obligation. Ask yourself this tonight. If you spoke honestly, without anger or fear, what would change? And would the cost of staying quiet be higher than the risk of being heard? If this story spoke to you, if you've lived something similar or watched it happen to someone you love, I'd like to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. These stories matter because they remind us we're not alone. And if you find comfort in stories like this, told gently and truthfully, consider supporting the channel by subscribing. Your presence keeps these voices alive. Until next time, take care of your truth. It's stronger than you think.